This week on the Communicators, a discussion about the FCC, net neutrality, and the future of telecommunications policy under a new administration. Our guest is Representative Mike Doyle, the Vice Chair of the House Telecommunications and Internet Subcommittee.
We have had several members of the House Telecommunications and the Internet Subcommittee on this program. We are pleased to be joined by the Vice Chair of that committee, Representative Mike Doyle, who also represents Pennsylvania. Representative, thanks for coming on the Communicators.
My pleasure.
Can you let us know, or let our viewers know, what the job of Vice Chair is for this committee and what kind of things you do in that role?
Well, you know, I always say being Vice Chairman of the committee is like being the Vice President. My chief responsibility is to call Chairman Markey up every morning and make sure he's in good health. But all kidding aside, Ed and I have a great relationship. We talk about a lot of the issues on the committee frequently. We are like-minded on telecom issues, and he's a tremendous chairman to work with. But basically, I'm there just to assist the chairman. If the chairman, for some reason, is unable to chair a hearing or a markup, I'm the person that takes his place. So I stand in the ready when my chairman needs me.
So when you came to the position, can you let our viewers know what issues or the background that you had in telecommunications and technology issues that brought you to the role of Vice Chair?
Yeah, I represent Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's funny, when people think of Pittsburgh, they think of the steel industry and manufacturing. But we've seen a transformation in Pittsburgh, and it's been knowledge-based. We have great universities there, like Carnegie Mellon, University of Pittsburgh, and I've become very interested in technology issues. So I was attracted to the Telecom Subcommittee, and I think some of my work on the committee and interest in these issues, led me to assume a higher position on the subcommittee. And so some of the things we're trying to work on the committee is to find ways to encourage competition and encourage innovation, because I think that's not only important for Pittsburgh and growing our economy, but it's important for the whole country.
So when you talk about competition and innovation, are there areas specifically in matters of policy that you think that directly applies, and what should be the key issues for your committee, and I guess by extension what you oversee, including the FCC?
Yeah, well, let me say, with regards to our oversight responsibilities, one of the things I'm very pleased about, and I've been on the committee for quite some time, is I think this year under Chairman Markey that we've seen Congress greatly step up its oversight activities. I would venture to say 5 years ago, some members of our committee might not be able to name the 5 FCC commissioners, and I don't think the commissioners might have known all the members of the committee. That certainly changed. We've seen the FCC up in front of our committee several times. We've held several oversight hearings on our digital future, on this transition for DTV, on a whole range of issues that are important to Americans, and I think that's been a pleasant change. Another thing that I particularly have an interest in on the committee is I've been interested in helping low-power FM stations get more access, and one of the big objections that were always made was this interference issue, which I think the MITRE study has proven to be not an issue, and so I've been working to get a piece of legislation passed to enable more low-power FM stations on the dial.
We'll talk about low-power FM in a bit, but back to the FCC. Is it fair to say that Democrats are concerned on your committee about how the FCC does its business?
I think there is somewhat a concern of how information is disseminated at the Commission. As you know, the staff there works for the chairman, and there's been some allegations that perhaps not all commissioners get all the information that's out there, that sometimes information is filtered at the FCC. Now, I'm going to reserve judgment on whether or not that is actually happening. That's subject to some hearings that we're going to have on our Oversight Committee, and that Chairman Dingell is also requesting information from the Commission. But I think for the most part, Chairman Martin's a very smart man. He has tried, I think, to work with the committee. We haven't always agreed on every issue, but he's always been willing to come in and discuss those issues, and I'm going to keep an open mind about it till we get more information at the hearings.
Did you support the investigation that Chairman Dingell launched?
Yeah, I did. I supported our chairman on that, and I think it's reasonable and our responsibility to have that kind of oversight, to make sure if there are allegations of that nature that they're looked into, and if we need to act, that we act appropriately. But I think, we should wait for the hearings to find out what the information really is.
And in the end, what do the hearings accomplish?
Well, hopefully what they accomplish is a process over at the FCC that's transparent and that all 5 commissioners have access to all the information there. That could only benefit consumers and benefit telecommunications policy.
Let's talk about Chairman Martin for a minute. You've had a chance to talk with him, meet with him, discuss with him. How would you grade him?
Very smart person, very politically savvy. I think has a genuine interest on the issues of the committee. I find him very well informed. Some people say, that maybe he's a little heavy-handed.
Would you be one of those people who say that?
I think on certain issues he could come across that way, but I've also found him to be willing to come in and discuss things too. So, if I had to grade the chairman, I probably wouldn't be giving him an A, but I wouldn't be giving him a D either. I think he sits somewhere in the middle, with that B to B minus range in my book.
Let me continue one more thing. When you say heavy-handedness, what is chief among those things where you think the chairman plays a heavy hand?
Well, I think the allegations are, and again, I want to be fair to the chairman, that we'll wait and see what the facts tell us, is that sometimes the chairman has access to information when it is favorable to, a position that he wants to move forward on. That information is shared with everyone, but when the information comes up that may not be favorable to an action that he wants to take, that information somehow doesn't make its way to the other commissioners. That's basically the allegation there, and we're going to look into it to see whether there's any factual basis to it or not.
You brought up digital television transition, and one of the issues that came up as of recent on this whole transition process was Chairman Martin floated an idea of maybe allowing for some test markets to see how it goes. How would you support that?
Well, I have mixed feelings about it. I've always felt that, we've played around with this date for a long time. We finally set a date certain, February 19th, 2009. It sort of forced everybody, I think, to focus and get prepared for that date. I'm concerned whether or not we're going to be ready. The idea of trying a test run first has its own set of issues. I mean, first of all, we'd have to pick a region where we're going to do that, get all the broadcasters on board. It could cause a lot of confusion. People know there's something coming up sometime soon. To give them 2 dates to worry about in the region, that could have its own interesting set of problems. On the other hand, it may help us run the bugs that are most certainly going to happen on February 19th. I don't think there's anybody that thinks this is going to go smoothly. And the idea of trying, a test run may help us deal with some of the problems that are going to occur on February 19th. So, I mean, I'm open to the idea. I have some reservations about this idea of creating 2 dates now in some parts of the country, which I think is just going to further confuse people.
Can we talk about how, when you talk about this issue with your constituents, how they're responding? Are they informed about what's going to happen next year?
Well, they're somewhat informed. I don't think they're fully informed. A lot of people know that there's a date coming up in the near future where their TV sets aren't going to work. There's a lot of confusion about, if I have an old TV set, does that mean it's not going to work? As opposed to, am I hooked up to cable or satellite or some other pay TV service? Other people might have cable service, but it's not on every one of their sets, and they think because they have cable service that somehow that's not going to affect their home, when that TV in their garage or in their kitchen that's not hooked up to their cable service isn't going to work anymore. So I still think we need to have an education process that's a lot more thorough than the one we have currently. We need to prepare people to act before this date, to order their coupons if they need their coupons, to know that there's a 90-day expiration on those coupons. And I think, we should make it easier, too. There's no reason why someone shouldn't be able to get a coupon online and order their box online. The idea that they have to go to a store to pick up this box, I think that could be made a better system. But I still think we have a long way to go. My fear is on February 20th, we're going to be getting a lot of phone calls.
2 questions on this front. How much have we spent to educate the public about this effort, and what do you think has been the value for the money that we have spent on it?
Well, we haven't spent near enough. I mean, when you look what has been spent in other countries that have gone through this same process that we're about to go through, the spending on the public side has been very, very little, and Lord knows that we've certainly made enough money on the auctions to to be able to invest a little bit more in this DTV transition and in the way of public service announcement. I think the industry has done what we've asked them to do. The cable TV operators, the broadcasters are running their PSAs. I think they've done pretty much what the government's asked them to do. I think the government could have done more.
You talked about the auction. Were you pleased with how the auction went?
Well, I mean, from a financial standpoint, the auction was a success. The C block brought in more money than we thought it would. I think all of us are disappointed that we didn't get a bidder for the D block, and we need to go back and revisit that and figure out why nobody bid on it and what we need to change so that we can encourage a bidder on that. So I think it gets mixed reviews. It's successful in some parts and disappointing on others.
Why do you think that the D block was not auctioned?
Well, I think a lot of potential investors in the D block, there was too much uncertainty. They had to put up a large amount of money and then afterwards negotiate with an entity that they really didn't know much about and also weren't quite sure what their responsibilities were going to be. And I think that was an amount of risk there that Wall Street, that investors started to shy away from. I think one of the things we really need to do on the D block is increase the transparency there and maybe state up front what is expected from the successful bidder so that they know going in when they're bidding what is going to be expected of them. I think the uncertainty and the lack of transparency made some potential investors nervous.
So do you think that if you clear up those issues, make it more transparent, someone will bid on it?
That's our hope. We're going to have a hearing on April 15th. To discuss the auction. I'm sure the D block is going to be a large part of that April 15th hearing. We're going to try to bring in some experts in the field to tell us what they think went wrong with the auction and try to learn from that hearing to structure the D block auction in such a way that it will encourage bidders.
One of the concerns going into the D block was the part of it that would be used for emergency officials as far as communication services. Where does that stand, and do you think such a network's going to happen?
I think it has to happen. I think it's important for the country that we have a network that's interoperable. We don't have that system right now, and it's very important. I think the D block is a good way to accomplish that, but I think we need to structure it in such a way that makes investors comfortable. Obviously, we didn't get it right the first time, and hopefully on April 15th we're gonna learn where the shortcomings are and maybe be able to fashion this a different way so that we can accomplish both goals: an interoperable system. And also a spectrum that's attractive to an investor.
And if that public communication system does happen, what does it do for, say, Pittsburgh?
Well, I mean, the thing that I think is important about it is that we're able to talk to one another. Pittsburgh's a perfect example. I live in a county, Allegheny County, that has 130 local governments. That means, and I represent 55 of them. That means I have 55 mayors, 55 police chiefs, 55 fire chiefs, and many of them can't talk to one another. The fire chief 2 towns away from the town I live in may be on a different band than his neighbor next door. We need a system that's interoperable, where people can talk to one another. I think that's important in this post 9/11 era, and it's something that we need to make sure we accomplish in that auction.
You talked about innovation at the beginning of the program, and one of the goals, I guess, for the Spectrum auction was to open up a section of it to allow third parties to come and develop and test wireless devices. Is that going to happen, and where do you think is the future if that happens? What do you think that means for the consumer?
Well, it only means good things for the consumer. I feel very strongly that we need an atmosphere that allows a person to take any device to any provider, and that device should work, and all the features on that device should work. I think, when you think that 4 companies control most of the devices we use, and that the BlackBerry that I have, works on the system that I have it on, but if I want to take that piece of equipment to another provider and say, I want your service now, my equipment doesn't work. That's not good for consumers. There's a whole range of features, and when you think about the innovation that will be created when manufacturers can make devices that have all kinds of features on it. In Europe, there's FM radio on people's cell phones, and emergency alert system can be put through that phone. There's just scores of innovation that will occur with these devices if people can take these devices anywhere and they work, and all the features are enabled. I think that's ultimately where we want to get to. The C block, has got us. Is moving us in that direction. I was hoping for a new entrant, new entry into that. That didn't occur, but I still think we're seeing some of the bigger companies, the Verizons and the AT&Ts of the world, are starting to see the logic to having this kind of open access for devices, and they're at least moving in the right direction.
This comes in light of the FCC making a decision on Skype, the internet phone service. For those who aren't aware, what did the FCC decide, and what do you think it means for his third parties and those who want to innovate, their ability to come to the government to get the ability to do so?
Well, I was kind of disappointed with the decision that was made by the FCC on Skype. When you think about, the Skype petition basically was asking for wireless Carter phone provisions, and back on the wired side, when we passed Carter phone decades ago, it led to innovations like fax machines and answering machines and all kinds of other devices that were able to be used on that network as long as they didn't harm the network. Skype was basically asking for the same thing on the wireless networks, that anybody could put any device on the wireless network as long as it didn't harm the network. And they were basically asking the Commission to give them Carter phone principles in wireless. What the Commission did instead, and I think prematurely, is decided that that's already beginning to happen, that some of the big carriers, Verizon, AT&T, have already announced that they are going to have more open access for devices on their networks, and basically said we don't need to do this. The companies are doing this on their own. I think that's a little premature to say that, because they say they're going to do it, but it hasn't actually happened yet. So I think a lot of us on the committee are going to watch the progress or the lack of progress that takes place pending this decision by the FCC, and maybe revisit the issue if it doesn't move as far ahead as we'd like to see it.
On another topic, your chairman has been quite vocal this session about the topic of net neutrality. Why do you think that is, and do you share his sentiments?
I do share his sentiments, and I think it's important that as technology and new innovation takes place, that we keep the basic premise of the internet. A lot of what companies are saying, back in years ago, we had phone lines and we had common carriage. And everybody could put whatever they want on that common carriage lines. And, when Congress changed the laws and restricted that last mile of copper into the home, what we saw basically is a duopoly now. When you think about broadband services and how they're delivered, you have a cable company and maybe one or two phone companies, because we didn't allow that competition on the phone lines. Over in Europe, for instance, there's dozens of companies that offer services over the phone lines, and you look at the cost of their internet services and the speed, they're much faster than we are, and they're cheaper than we are. They're starting to talk about gigabytes while we're still talking about megabytes. So the result is, when you look at the net neutrality argument and take that one step forward, now you have companies saying, well, we're providing our service over FiOS and over coaxial, and we built that. The government didn't build that, and we should be able to control what goes over those lines. So, well, I don't think that should be the case. I read a story just recently, I think it was in the New York Times, where someone had said, two companies make all the guitars in the United States, but they don't tell people what they can play on those guitars. We have computers, we have Macs and PCs, but nobody tells us what applications we can run on that. And I think it should be the same with the internet. We may get it through coaxial, we may get it through FiOS, we may get it through our phone lines, but I don't think anybody should be playing gatekeeper on what information and access to information a person can get on that. So Chairman Markey's introducing a bill. I mean, it's a sort of a vision of where we are in broadband policy from 30,000 feet up in the air. He's calling for 8 summits across the country where we can bring people in and sort of put this in layman's term, get the geek speak into common language that people in Pittsburgh and other parts of the country can start to understand this debate and why it's important that the internet be kept as it has been. And we're going to be watching the actions of companies too. We have already seen companies limit access on uploads, and no one's saying that they don't have a right to manage their traffic. But what we're saying is they don't have a right to discriminate and slow one person down but not another person, or to block access to information over the internet. I think that's what concerns people like Chairman Markey and myself.
And you're referring to Comcast and BitTorrent.
Well, I think that's a good example of you know, where at some point there were actually uploads were being stopped, you know, this has happened in very rare instances, but it's happened. And you know, the industry has said to us, you know, you're trying to regulate something that isn't occurring or hasn't occurred. Well, we've seen it occurred you know, it's been very infrequent, but there has been instances, and I think we want to make sure that doesn't happen.
And so if I'm an industry person, don't I look at this potential legislation and say it could quash the spirit of innovation if I'm concerned about new regulation?
Well, you know, it's funny, when we were doing the C block and there was a $4.6 billion reserve on the C block, and we wanted to open it up for any device on the C block, industry came to us and said, you can't do that. If you do that, no one's going to bid on that C block. You're going to just squash any interest in the C block. Well, guess what happened? The C block went for higher than the $4.6 billion reserve. It's no different there. Everybody realizes the value that exists here, and innovation will only flourish under a system where the internet is kept the way it was designed to be kept, and I think the industry concerns are overstated. Chairman Markey's bill, by the way, does nothing in terms of regulation. This is a very you know, beginning approach to the issue of net neutrality, where really we're just holding summits to disseminate information and get more information from people out in the field of what's important and what we need to do to protect the integrity of that system. So it's not a bill that puts any kind of regulation on the industry, you know, as such.
The FCC has held an off-Washington hearing on this issue, planning on holding another one in California. What does that say to you about the FCC's interest in this?
Well, I think it's good. I know a hearing was held up in Boston already, one out on the West Coast. I'd love for the FCC to come to Pittsburgh and talk about this too. We have many folks at Carnegie Mellon, at Google, and others that I think could give them some valuable input into what, you know, they should be looking at and what the concerns should be. I think it's a healthy thing. I'm glad to see the FCC doing it, and I think they should do a lot more of it.
Do you get calls from residents of Pittsburgh saying, hey, we need to keep an eye on this thing?
Yeah, believe it or not, there is interest in this. Now, I don't think it gets down to the level of the average Pittsburgher on the street. A lot of this is I don't want to say it's in geek speak, but I'm saying, you know, the debate on net neutrality is somewhat esoteric, and it's not what Pittsburghers are talking about on the street right now. They're probably the conversation's more along the lines of, are the Pittsburgh Pirates going to finish in any place but last? But there is interest in it, and especially those people that are interested in the future of broadband and want to see broadband grow, like we're seeing it in other countries, that I think it is important.
You talked about low-power FM stations. Why the concern?
I think they provide a great service, a great community service, and for years they've been blocked from being able to get on the channels because the broadcasters had always made the argument that they caused interference if they were closer than 3 notches on the dial. The FCC wanted to put more low-power FM stations on, and this was the objection that was raised. One of the things the FCC did was commission a study called the MITRE study, where we actually went through and examined whether or not this interference claim that was being made by the broadcasters had any basis in fact. What the MITRE study showed is that there is an interference. So there's really no technological or engineering reason that low-power FM stations shouldn't be allowed more access on the dial. So Congressman Lee Terry and I have co-sponsored a piece of legislation that would basically allow low-power FM stations access to the dial. They provide a valuable service. It's a niche service. They really don't compete with the big FM stations, and I think the interference argument is bogus, and I don't see any reason why we can't allow some of these community stations on the air.
You're an uncommitted superdelegate, is that correct?
That's correct.
And the reason I'm asking is that we have 3 potential presidential candidates, 2 on the Democratic side. As far as those are concerned, what do you think Senators Clinton and Obama bring to the world of telecom and technology policy? And if one of them do become president, what changes potentially could we see?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I've had the opportunity to sit down with both Senator Clinton and Senator Obama, and in fact, I'm getting ready to change my cell phone number with 2 weeks left in the Pennsylvania primary. Well, I hear from them a little bit more than I'd like to, but we've discussed a variety of things, and telecom policy is one of them. I think both of them understand the importance of encouraging innovation, and that the best way to do that is to have competition. I feel very confident that both of these candidates are going to encourage the type of policies that will help us grow the internet and broadband. I think that's very important. We want to see broadband deployment across every part of this country. We want it to be accessible, we want it to be affordable, and we want to see it increased and grow. We shouldn't be talking about how to manage a scarce amount of broadband. We should be expanding the amount of broadband we have so that all this innovation and all these other things can take place on this information highway. So I'm satisfied that we have two candidates. I don't get a chance to speak to Senator McCain that much, but with Senators Clinton and Obama, that we're going to have allies in the White House in that regard.
This being a presidential year, are there going to be big advances as far as legislation, policy, movement this year, or do you think that will get booted to next year?
I think the latter. I don't suspect that we're going to do anything major. The big thing in front of us right now is February 19th. I think everybody's sort of got their eyes on that right now. I think you're going to see a lot more hearings that we're going to be going through that process, but major pieces of telecom legislation, I don't think we're going to see that before the presidential election.
Now, come November, are you, excuse me, come November, are you still going to find yourself vice chair of the committee? Or the subcommittee?
Well, I mean, we'll see. In the beginning of the year, we reorganized. There'll be a new session of Congress, new members. These are slots that are appointed by the chairman of the committee. I'd like to think that I've done good work on the committee, worked well with Chairman Markey. I'm certainly interested on continuing to serve as vice chair of the committee, and I have confidence that Chairman Dingell enjoys my work on the committee and will reappoint me, but I don't want to presume that. We'll find out when we reorganize in January.
Representative Mike Doyle represents Pennsylvania and serves as the vice chair of the House Telecommunications and the Internet Subcommittee. Thanks for being on the Communicators.
Thanks, Pedro.